It's what? No, Anayo, that is not true at all. I love Adora with all my heart. I would never think such a thing. Once upon a time, in the heart of Umuihe village, where the trees danced in the gentle breeze and the river sang sweet songs, lived a young man named Obiora. He was a humble farmer, known for his strong hands and kind heart. Obiora had always been content with his simple life, working in the fields and helping his family. But as he grew older, he began to feel a deep longing in his heart, a longing for someone to share his life with. One day, as he was returning from the market, Obiora saw her. She was standing by the well, drawing water with the grace of a queen. Her name was Adora, and she was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Her skin was as smooth as the surface of a river at dawn, and her eyes sparkled like the stars that lit up the night sky. She had a gentle smile that warmed Obiora's heart, and from that moment, he knew that she was the one. Obiora found himself returning to the well more often, hoping to catch a glimpse of Adora. He would find any excuse to talk to her, asking about her family, her day, or the weather. Adora, in turn, was drawn to Obiora's kindness and humility. He was not like the other young men in the village, who were boastful and proud. Obiora was different. He was caring, gentle, and always ready to help those in need. As the days turned into weeks, their friendship blossomed into love. Obiora would walk Adora home from the market, and they would talk for hours about their hopes and dreams. Adora loved how Obiora spoke of his family with such respect and how he was always willing to put others before himself. Obiora admired Adora's strength, her intelligence, and her unwavering faith in the goodness of people. When Obiora finally gathered the courage to ask Adora to marry him, she said yes without hesitation. Their union was a joyful occasion celebrated by the entire village. The elders blessed their marriage, and the villagers danced and sang late into the night. Everyone could see that Obiora and Adora were meant for each other. Not everyone was happy about the marriage, though Anayo, Obiora's elder brother, had always been the head of the family after their parents passed away. He was a man of tradition, strict and unyielding. Anayo believed that everything should be done according to custom, and he took it upon himself to ensure that his younger brother followed the same path. Anayo's wife, Nkechi, was another story altogether. She was a woman with a sharp tongue and a heart filled with jealousy. Before Obiora met Adora, Nkechi had hoped that Obiora would marry one of her best friends, a woman named Uju. Uju was beautiful and charming, but she lacked the warmth and kindness that made Adora so special. Nkechi had tried to persuade Obiora to consider Uju, but he had politely refused, saying that his heart belonged to another. This rejection had wounded Nkechi's pride, and she never forgave Adora for stealing Obiora's heart. From the day Obiora and Adora got married, Nkechi made it her mission to make Adora's life as difficult as possible. At first, it was a small thing. Nkechi would gossip about Adora in the village, spreading lies about her being lazy or ungrateful. She would make snide comments whenever Adora was around, saying things like, "A woman's worth is in her children," knowing full well that Adora had not yet been blessed with a child. When Adora would help with chores, Nkechi would find fault with everything she did. "Can't you sweep the floor properly?" Nkechi would snap. even when the floor was spotless. What kind of wife are you if you can't even cook a proper meal? She would say, even though Adora's cooking was praised by everyone else. Adora, ever the peacemaker, would smile and bear it, trying her best to ignore Nkechi's harsh words. She believed that with time Nkechi would accept her and that they could become friends. But as the months passed, Nkechi's behavior only grew worse. Nkechi was not content with just making Adora's life miserable. She began to weave a web of lies, hoping to turn Anayo against his brother and his wife. She would whisper in Anayo's ear late at night, telling him things that were not true. Anayo, do you know that Obiora is not happy with Adora? Nkechi would say, her voice dripping with malice. He regrets marrying her. He has even told me that he wishes he had never married Adora, that he would have married Uju instead. Anayo, who had always trusted his wife, began to believe her words. He started to look at his brother with suspicion, wondering if Obiora was truly happy in his marriage. One evening, after a particular long day in the fields, Anayo called Obiora to the side. "Brother," he began, his voice low and serious, "there is something I need to talk to you about." Obiora, sensing the tension in his brother's voice, nodded. "What is it, Anayo?" Anayo looked around to make sure no one was listening. "It is about Adora," he said. "Nkechi has been telling me that you are not happy with her, that you regret marrying her. Is this true?" Obiora was taken by surprise by his brother's words. "What? No, Anayo, that is not true at all. I love Adora with all my heart. I would never think such a thing." But Anayo was not convinced. "Obiora, I know you feel pressure to stay with her because of what people might say, but it is not too late to make a change. If you leave Adora and marry someone else, perhaps you will be blessed with children." Obiora felt a surge of anger and sadness. "Anayo, I will not leave Adora. She is my wife and I love her. Children or no children, I will stand by her side. Please do not ask me to do such a thing again." Anayo frowned, disappointed by his brother's response. "Very well," he said cutely, "but do not say I did not warn you. The kinsmen are watching, and they will not be pleased with you if you do not produce an heir." Obiora left the conversation with a heavy heart. He knew his brother meant well in his own way, but he could not understand how Anayo could ask him to abandon the woman he loved. As the days passed, Nkechi's lie continued to poison the relationship between the brothers. Anayo, who had once been close to Obiora, began to distance himself. He would no longer speak to Obiora with the warmth he once did, and he would often give Adora cold, disapproving looks. Adora noticed the change, and it worried her deeply. She could feel the tension in the air whenever the family gathered, and it seems that no matter how hard she tried, she could not win Nkechi's favor. One evening, after a particular bitter argument between the brothers, Adora found Obiora sitting alone by the edge of the house, his head in his hands. She sat beside him and gently touched his shoulder. "Obi," she whispered, using the affectionate name she had for him. "What is troubling you?" Obiora looked up, his eyes filled with pain. "It's Anayo," he said quietly. "He wants me to leave you, Ada. He thinks that if I marry someone else, we will have children." Adora felt a stab of pain in her heart. She had always known that her inability to conceive weighed heavily on her husband, but she had never imagined that Anayo would go this far. "What did you tell him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I told him no," Obiora replied firmly. "I told him that I will never leave you. No matter what, you are my wife and I love you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she threw her arms around Obiora. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for standing by me." But even as they held each other, both of them knew that the situation was growing worse. Anayo was not the type of man to give up easily, and with Nkechi fueling the fire, the days following Anayo's conversation with Obiora was tense. Obiora and Adaora did their best to carry on their lives, but the atmosphere in the village has changed. Rumors spread like wildfire, fueled by Nkechi's malicious whispers. People began to look at Adaora with pity and Obiora with a mix of sympathy and disappointment. It wasn't long before the kinsmen of Umuihe called a meeting to discuss the matter. The kinsmen were the elders of the village, respected for their wisdom and experience. They were responsible for making important decisions that affected the community, and their judgment was final. Obiora and Adaora was summoned to the village square, where the kinsmen had gathered under the shade of a large Iroko tree. The entire village turned out to witness the meeting, curious to see how the matter would be resolved. As Obiora and Adaora approached the gathering, they could feel the weight of the villagers' eyes on them. Adaora held Obiora's hand tightly, drawing strength from his presence. She knew that this was a pivotal moment in their lives, and she prayed silently for the strength to face whatever was to come. The leader of the kinsmen, an old man named Nwafo, stood up and raised his hand for silence. The murmur of the crowd died down, and all eyes turned to him. "Obiora, Adaora," Nwafo began in a deep, commanding voice, "we have come here today to discuss a matter that concerns not just you, but the entire village. We have heard disturbing reports that you have been married for 5 years, yet you have not produced any child." Obiora opened his mouth to speak, but Nwafo held up a hand to stop him. "Do not interrupt," Nwafo said silently. "This is a serious matter. In our culture, children are the continuation of our lineage, the ones who will carry on our traditions and inherit our land. Without children, a family line dies, and that is a great tragedy." Adaora felt a lump form in her throat. She knew that what Nwafo was saying was true, but hearing it spoken aloud in front of the entire village was like a knife to her heart. Nwafo continued, "Your brother Anayo has expressed his concern to us. He has told us that he has spoken to you privately, Obiora, and advised you to take another wife who can bear your children, yet you have refused." Obiora nodded, his jaw set in determination. "Yes, I refused. I love Adaora, and I will not leave her." Nwafo sighed heavily. "Love is important, Obiora, but so is duty. We understand your feelings, but the welfare of the family and the community must come first." At this, Nkechi, who had been standing in the crowd, stepped forward. "Nwafo, with all due respect, I believe Adaora is the one who has bewitched Obiora. He is not thinking clearly. If he were, he would have done what is right for the family." Gasps erupted from the crowd, and Adora's heart sank. She knew that Nkechi's words were poisonous, designed to turn the village against her. Obiora took a step forward. Anger flashed in his eyes. "Nkechi, that is enough. Adaora has done nothing wrong. She is a good wife, and I will not have you speak of her in that way. Nwafo raised his hand again, silencing the crowd. We will not tolerate accusations without evidence, Nkechi. However, the fact remains that you, Obiora, have a duty to your family. If you do not take another wife, you risk bringing shame upon your lineage. Obiora's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the pressure mounting, but he refused to be swayed. I will not take another wife, he said firmly. Adora is my wife, and I will stand by her no matter what. Nwafo exchanged glance with the other kinsmen, who nodded solemnly. He turned back to Obiora and Adaora. His expression grieved. Very well, Obiora, you have made our decision, but know that it comes with consequences. The kinsmen have decided that you must leave the family house. If you will not fulfill your duty, you cannot remain under the protection of this family. Adora felt a wave of despair wash over her. She had known that this might happen, but hearing it confirmed by the kinsmen was devastating. She squeezed Obiora's hand, her only source of comfort in that moment. Obiora nodded his head. Obiora nodded, his face pale but resolute. If that is your decision, then we will leave. But know this, our love is stronger than any hardship. We will find a way to survive. With that, Obiora turned and led Adora away from the gathering. The villagers watched in stunned silence as they walked away, hand in hand, leaving behind the life they had known. The days that followed were some of the hardest that Obiora and Adora had ever faced. They had no choice but to leave the family home, the place where they had built their life together. They moved to a small run-down hut on the outskirts of the village. It was far from the comfort and security they had once known, but it was the only place they could afford. Obiora worked harder than ever, taking an extra jobs in the fields and doing whatever he could to provide for Adora. But the work was tough and the pay was very little. Adora did her best to make their new home as comfortable as possible, but it was difficult. The walls were thin and the roof leaked whenever it rained, but she never complained, knowing that Obiora was doing everything he could. Despite the hardship, Obiora and Adora's love for each other only grew stronger. They found solace in each other's company and they made the best of their situation. At night, they would sit outside their hut, watching the stars and talking about their dreams for the future. But the villagers continued to whisper behind their backs, and Nkechi's cruel words still haunted them. Whenever they went to the market or passed through the village, they could feel the eyes of the villagers on them, judging them for their childless marriage. One day, as Adora was returning from the market, she overheard two women talking in hushed tones. "It's such a shame," one of them said. "Obiora was such a promising young man, but now look at him, all because of that wife of his." The other woman nodded. "Yes, it's clear. She's cursed. No children after 5 years of marriage. There must be something wrong with her." Adora's heart ached at their words, but she kept walking, her head held high. She refused to let their cruelty break her spirit. She knew that as long as she had Obiora by her side, she could face anything. But the pain was still there, deep in her heart. She longed for a child, not just to silence whispers of the villagers, but to complete the family she and Obiora had dreamed of every night. She prayed for a miracle, hoping that one day their prayers would be answered. Meanwhile, back at the family house, Nkechi was not content to let Obiora and Adaora live in peace. She had been furious when Anayo had simply allowed them to live without further punishment. In her heart, Adaora deserved to suffer for taking Obiora away from the woman Nkechi had chosen for him. Nkechi's jealousy and bitterness consumed her, and she began to devise plans to make life even more difficult for Obiora and Adaora. She knew that the only way to truly break them was to destroy the love they had for each other. Nkechi started by planting seeds of doubt in Anayo's mind. She would tell him lies about how Obiora and Adaora was struggling, how they were failing to make ends meet, and how it was all Adora's fault. Obiora deserves better, Nkechi would say, her voice dripping with false concern. If he had married Uju, he would be living a comfortable life now, with children to carry on the family name. But instead, he's stuck in that miserable hut with a woman who can't even give him a child. Anayo, who had always been influenced by his wife's words, began to worry about his brother. He knew that Obiora was a proud man, but the thought of him suffering because of his loyalty to Adaora troubled him. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Anayo turned to Nkechi with a heavy sigh. "What do you think I should do, Nkechi? I don't want to see Obiora suffer like this." Nkechi pretended to think for a moment before replying. "You could always try to persuade him again. Anayo, tell him that it's not too late to leave Adaora and find a new wife. Maybe if he hears it from you again, he will listen." Anayo nodded slowly, considering her words. "Perhaps you are right. I will talk to him tomorrow." But Nkechi wasn't done. She knew that just talking to Obiora wouldn't be enough. She needed to find a way to drive a wedge between him and Adaora, to make Obiora doubt his love for her. As she lay in bed that night, an idea began to form in her mind. It was risky, but if it worked, it would finally rid her of Adaora for good. The next day, Nkechi put her plan into action. She visited Uju, the woman she had always wanted Obiora to marry, and explained her scheme. "Uju, you know how much I've always wanted you to marry Obiora," Nkechi began. "He's been blind to the love you could give him, but I believe there is still a chance to win him over." Uju's eyes lit up at the mention of Obiora. She had always had feelings for him, and Nkechi's words filled her with hope. "What do you want me to do?" Uju asked eagerly. Nkechi smiled slowly. "It's simple. All you have to do is to be there for him. Show him that you care, that you are the woman he should marry. I will take care of the rest." Uju agreed, and the two women began to put their plans into motion. Nkechi knew that Obiora would never be unfaithful to Adaora. A few days later, Nkechi sent a message to Obiora, inviting him to the family home under the pretense of discussing a matter of importance. When Obiora arrived, Nkechi greeted him warmly. She waited until he was comfortable before broaching the subject she had planned. "Obiora," Nkechi began, her tone gentle, "I have been thinking about you and Adaora. I know how much you love her, but I can't help but worry about the toll this situation is taking on you." Obiora frowned, sensing where this conversation was heading. "Nkechi, I appreciate your concern, but I have already made my decision. I will not leave Adaora." Nkechi sighed, feigning sympathy. "I understand, Obiora, but sometimes love isn't enough. You deserve happiness, and so does Adaora. But staying in a situation that only brings pain is not fair to either of you." Obiora shook his head, frustrated. You don't understand, Nkechi. Adora is my happiness. I can't imagine my life without her. Nkechi reached across the table and placed her hand on his. I just want you to be happy, Obiora, and I believe you can find that happiness, even if it means making a difficult decision. Obiora pulled his hand away, feeling uneasy. I appreciate your concern, Nkechi, but my mind is made up. Please stop trying to convince me otherwise. Nkechi smiled sweetly. Of course, Obiora, I won't bring it up again. But as Obiora left the family home that day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He trusted Nkechi, but her words had planted a seed of doubt in his mind, and that doubt began to grow. Back at their small hut, Adora noticed that something was troubling Obiora. He seemed distant, lost in thought, and she could sense the tension in his every moment. Obi, is everything all right with you? Adora asked one evening as they sat together by the fire. Obiora forced a smile, trying to hide his worries. Yes, Ada, everything is fine. Just tired, that's all. But Adora wasn't convinced. She could tell that something was bothering him, but she didn't want to push him to talk about it if he wasn't ready. As the days passed, Obiora unease grew. Nkechi's words echoed in his mind, and he found himself questioning whether he was doing the right thing by staying with Adora. He loved her deeply, but the pressure from his family, the villagers, and now even Nkechi was becoming too much to bear. One evening, as Obiora was returning home from the fields, he ran into Uju on the path. She greeted him warmly, her smile bright and inviting. Obiora, it's so good to see you again, Uju said, her voice full of warmth. How have you been? Obiora smiled politely, though his heart wasn't in it. I have been well, Uju, just busy with work. Uju nodded, her eyes full of sympathy. I have heard about everything that is been going on. It must be so hard for you and Adora. Obiora smiled, faltered. It hasn't been easy, but we are managing. Uju reached out and touched his shoulder. If you ever need someone to talk to, I am here for you, Obiora. You don't have to go through this alone. Obiora felt a pang of guilt. He knew that Uju's intentions were good, but he couldn't help feeling that something wasn't right. He thanked her politely and continued on his way home. But the encounter left him feeling more conflicted than ever. When he arrived home, Adora was waiting for him, her face lighting up as she saw him approach. But as she looked into his eyes, Obi, please talk to me, Adora said, her voice soft and pleading. I can see that something is bothering you. Whatever it is, we can face it together. Can you please share it with me? Obiora sighed, knowing that he couldn't keep his worries from Adora any longer. He sat down beside her and took her hands in his. Ada, I don't know how to say this, he began, his voice heavy with emotion. I have been feeling a lot of pressure lately from the family, from the village. Even Nkechi has been trying to convince me that maybe we should consider other options. Adora's heart sank, but she forced herself to stay calm. Other options? What do you mean? Obiora looked away, unable to meet her eyes. She suggested that maybe I should leave you and marry someone else, someone who can give me children. What do you think that happened next? Did he carry out the suggestion of his brother? Did Obiora later left Adora, his wife, to marry another woman? Find out in part 2. Please stay connected. This is when the story gets more interesting. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.